Get right on top of that so it sounds awesome. Which is exactly how I like my Bible.
If you've ever been a kid, you've definitely been lost, and you've definitely had somebody who cared about you freaking out about where you were. I got lost one time when I was like 2 or 3 at this mall in Kansas City, and mom and dad got their signals crossed, and they were freaked out and panicked. Pretty sure I can still feel the pain of the bone-crushing hugs I got when they found me. And in this passage we're looking at today, we get a really familiar human story about little Jesus. He's a 12-year-old kid, and he's going to wander off and freak out his parents by going who knows where to do who knows what. Except what's not so familiar about this story is that we're going to discover that he went somewhere that kids don't sneak off to go to very often, and to do something that kids normally wouldn't be very interested in doing. And so the sneaking off or getting lost part, well, that seems pretty normal. What he was up to really raises questions about who this guy is and what he's going to do, which is a fitting conclusion to the prologue of Luke, where we've been spending a bunch of time for the last several episodes getting a sense of what the future holds for Jesus and what he's going to do in the world. We're in Luke chapter 2, verses 41 through 52, with a bunch of interesting questions and things to tackle on this little story about Jesus getting lost. Here's the whole thing. Verse 41. Every year, his parents, his being Jesus, went to Jerusalem for the feast of the Passover. When he was 12 years old, they went up to the feast according to the custom, and after the feast was over, while his parents were returning home, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but they were unaware of it. So thinking he was in their company, they traveled on for a day. Then they began looking for him among their relatives and friends. When they didn't find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. His mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." "Why were you searching for me?" he asked. "Didn't you know I had to be in my father's house?" But they didn't understand what he was saying to them. Then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. But his mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and men. Here's what you need to know. Passover was a big, important Jewish holiday, and Jerusalem would have been packed to the gills with people. There's a whole bunch of theological stuff about Passover that I think is really pertinent to this conversation, but for the interest of time, I'm going to do a bonus video on that you can check out later on. Mary and Joseph were good Jews. They were spending money they maybe didn't really have to every year go and celebrate this thing properly in Jerusalem. And so Jesus now has been to Jerusalem, to the temple, 12, 13 times. I'm not even going to get into how he got lost. These were different times. People traveled in different ways. There were different expectations for being with your family and your extended family. Whatever the case, Jesus didn't get lost anyway. He made a conscious choice to stay behind and hang out at the temple. If everybody left, I guess they were the ones who got lost. Well, eventually they find him, and that gets us to what I think is the heart of the passage and where I want to put my focus. It's these red letters right here in verse 49. It's the opening line from Jesus in the whole Bible. I mean, yeah, you have Matthew and Mark, but that's an older version of Jesus talking. This is the only place where we get 12-year-old Jesus talking. And I think what he says tells us a ton about who he was as a kid, what his role was going to be here, and it foreshadows a whole bunch of stuff that's going to come later theologically. So here's what I get out of this phrase. Mary looks him up. He says, "Why were you searching for me? Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house?" So right off the bat, we see this situation pointing to the incarnation. That's the thing where God took on flesh and became Jesus, right? So you've got Mary, who's his mom, like legitimately. He came out of her. That's his real live mom. Joseph is along. That's like his earth dad. But I mean, this is saying that Jesus is the Son of God. So he's talking with his mom at his Father's house. Here we see human Jesus and God Jesus, which make the one Jesus, together. So right off the bat, in this prologue, we have incarnational stuff, and at the end of the prologue, we have more incarnational stuff. It doesn't come out with a smoking gun verse and be like, Jesus is God in the flesh, Son of God, but it really is evident here. A second thing that we see is that Jesus just wanted to hang around with his Father, which makes a ton of sense, because if Jesus is God, and God is this pre-existent being who's been around forever, it means that Jesus, God, and the Holy Spirit, the three beings that make up the Godhead, have been together in like the best relationship that's ever been imagined ever, forever. And for the first time ever, they've spent 12 years apart, and that's weird. And so it would make sense that if that really was the awesome relationship that it must be, that Jesus would want to hang out there, because he conceived of his relationship with his Father rightly much different than any other person ever would. Finally, this also points us to Jesus' number one priority throughout the rest of the Gospels, not just Luke, but all of them. Jesus, by number, talks more about his relationship with his Father, the glory of his Father's plan, than anything else. He's obsessed with this subject. And so you might think, oh, I don't know, if I were to do a list, I would bet Jesus would talk about don't have sex, drink beer, do the swears, and maybe like some stuff about church. Those things are way down the list. The center of his message had to do with pointing to the glory of the Father and talking about his Father's kingdom. In other words, in this one teeny tiny little turn of a phrase, we don't just get a sense of who Jesus is, God in the flesh, we get a sense of what Jesus is into and what is the guiding truth, the most central orienting thing that's going to inform everything else that he's talking about. This is so important. If we get this, we are going to make so much more sense of the rest of what we see in Luke. But if we get to the end of this prologue and we're doing the lazy reading thing, and we're like, okay, so Jesus, he was interesting, he was a kid and stuff, cool. Now let's get on to the part where he gives us rules about how to live that we can fret about ourselves and inflict on other people. We've missed the point. The point is that Jesus is here as man and as God to bridge the gap between man and God. And he's doing it motivated by his love for his Father and his willingness to participate, even at great cost to himself, in this plan to redeem things. That's the setup. What's coming next is the payoff. Hey, if you think I've earned it, and only if you think I've really earned it, I would welcome your subscription to this channel, and you could pay me a huge compliment by sharing this with your friends. Now I hear the pitter-patter of little feet, which means I have not yet lost my offspring, and I'm going to go hang out with them and get lunch. I'm Matt. It's 10 Minute Bible Hour. See you soon.